Have you read Senator Grassley's and my report on Hunter Biden's corruption issued in September of 2020 and November of 2020? Have you read those reports?
I have had a chance to look at it.
Do you see any sign of Russian disinformation in those reports?
That would be a hard question for me to answer.
No, it's very easy. Yeah. It's very easy.
What I would say
it's a very easy answer. There is no Russian disinformation. That report is completely clean of any interference of foreign influence, although we have been falsely accused, including by the chairman of this committee, of spreading Russian disinformation. And, Director Wray, you made a comment here in answer to the chairman's questioning that you are committed to working with this committee. You'll excuse me if I find those words ring incredibly hollow. I had to subpoena you as chairman of this committee. I really didn't get anything. I've written repeated letters, either with no response whatsoever or a non-response response. It's one of the reasons, and I'm very grateful to all the whistleblowers that are coming forward to various committees, to various members, people of integrity within your organizations, blowing the whistle on the corruption at some of the highest levels of the FBI. First question, do you commit publicly that the FBI will not retaliate against those whistleblowers?
Senator, we will not retaliate against whistleblowers. I take the protections that are in law and regulation of whistleblowers extremely seriously.
Good, we'll hold you to that. Okay,
just like
next.
I take compliance with all of our other rules very seriously.
Senator Grassley wrote you a letter on July 25th of 2020 in which he said that whistleblowers to his office reported that FBI officials initiated a scheme to downplay derogatory information on Hunter Biden for the purpose of shutting down investigatory activity related to his potential criminal exposure by labeling it, quote, disinformation. Boy, that's a familiar term. That scheme was hatched in August of 2020. Also included, he said, in August 2020, FBI supervisory intelligence analyst Brian Auten opened an assessment which was used by FBI headquarters team to improperly discredit negative Hunter Biden information as disinformation and cause investigative activity to cease. Have you responded to Senator Grassley's letter that he wrote over 3 months ago?
Senator, I know there have been a whole slew of letters. I believe we've responded to a number of them, but I'm sitting here right now. I can't tell you which ones we've responded to and which ones.
Have you looked into those charges that there was a scheme hatched in August 2020 to downplay the derogatory information on Hunter Biden? Have you looked into that personally?
We have, as we speak, a number of personnel matters that are underway, and for as reasons I'm sure you can appreciate, we can't discuss.
I know that's always your excuse.
Matters.
No, I got it. I understand how you remain above the law by using that excuse repeatedly. The reason I'm a little sensitive on August 2020 is that on August 6th, both Senator Grassley and I received an unsolicited briefing by members of the FBI, which I knew immediately was a setup. No new information whatsoever. I knew it was a setup, and I was correct because 9 months later, on May 1st, it was leaked to the Washington Post to smear me. I have written you publicly a number of times asking who directed that briefing. Are you prepared to tell me in public who directed that briefing now?
Senator, first off, I can't discuss specific defensive briefings more broadly, and that's a longstanding practice.
So tell me then, why have you refused to meet with us to privately tell us who directed that briefing?
So if I may finish my answer to the question. It's longstanding practice not to discuss specific defensive briefings. We have, as my understanding, responded in writing to a letter that you sent. I think
it's bureaucratic gobbledygook is what that is. That's not a response.
We offered in that letter to provide a senior executive of the FBI to walk through in detail our process.
What your process is, but not specifically who directed a briefing that was used to smear me. Have you looked into the leaking of that briefing to the Washington Post? Have you investigated that?
I'm not going to discuss specific investigations. As to the briefing question and who directs it, let me be very clear about this. When it comes to election-related defensive briefings, there is not a single person who makes that decision. That is an interagency process that was set up by the prior administration, signed off on by the former president,
Well, there
chaired by the
are
Office of the Director
there are
of National
persons in
Intelligence.
that interagency, correct? So there would be persons. So we should know who those persons are. Why won't you tell us who directed that briefing? The persons then.
I would refer you to the process that was put in place, and we can give you more information about the process if you would like.
Have you read Senator Grassley's and my report on Hunter Biden's corruption issued in September of 2020 and November of 2020? Have you read those reports?
I have had a chance to look at it.
Do you see any sign of Russian disinformation in those reports?
That would be a hard question for me to answer.
No, it's very easy. It's very easy.
What I would say
It's a
to
very easy answer. There is no Russian disinformation. That report is completely clean of any interference of foreign influence, although we have been falsely accused, including by the chairman of this committee, of spreading Russian disinformation. Are you aware of the FBI having any involvement whatsoever in the October 19, 2020 public statement by 51 former intelligence officials?
I'm not aware of any involvement by the FBI in what you're describing.
The reason I ask is if it's true that in August of 2020, the FBI initiated a scheme to downplay derogatory information on Hunter Biden, it would seem like maybe part of that scheme would be to get intelligence officials to issue a letter that stated that the laptop had all the earmarks of a Russian information operation. That was totally false. We now know that the Hunter laptop is completely authentic.
Senator Kennedy from Louisiana is recognized.
Madam Secretary, welcome. Mr. Chairman, welcome. Congratulations. Mr. Chairman, I want to start with you. I realize that no one is clairvoyant, but I think it's fair to say that the experts who have been advising you about the future rate of inflation have pretty much the same credibility as those late night psychic hotlines you see on TV. Is the Fed considering increasing the pace of its tapering? We've got to get control of inflation. It's ravaging our people.
So I think what we missed about inflation was we didn't predict the supply side problems, and those are highly unusual and very difficult, very nonlinear, and it's really hard to predict those things. But that's really what we missed, and that's why all of the professional forecasters had much lower inflation projections. You ask about the taper, and so yes, as I mentioned earlier, since the last meeting, we've seen basically elevated inflation pressures. We've seen very strong labor market data without any improvement in labor supply. And we've seen strong spending data too. So, and remembering that every dollar of asset purchases does increase accommodation, we now look at an economy that's very strong and inflationary pressures that are high. And that means it's appropriate, I think, for us to discuss at our next meeting, which is in a couple of weeks, whether it will be appropriate to wrap up our purchases a few months earlier, as I mentioned.
All right.
But in those 2 weeks, we're going to get more data and we're going to learn more about the new variant.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, you and I don't agree on everything, but I have great respect for your intellect and and your experience. And I understand you have a job to do, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that in my opinion, there is no fair-minded person in the Milky Way who believes the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill are not going to require the American people to incur substantial debt. Now, here's my question. And I'm looking for a number. How much, in the Biden administration's opinion, is too much debt? At what point, as you incur debt, will the Biden administration say, okay, that's it? We can't borrow any more or it's going to hurt the American people?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I disagree with your assessment of Build Back Better. It is fully paid for, or even more than fully paid for, and CBO just completed a comprehensive review of it in which they found essentially the same thing. And I believe it was important that it be fully paid for. Now, I think no single metric is appropriate for evaluating whether or not the level of debt in an economy is reasonable and sustainable. And we're accustomed to looking at debt to GDP ratios and using those kind of metrics and looking around the world. Many economists have found that debt to GDP ratios of 100 or more tend to be associated with significant problems.
Are we at 100 and more?
We are,
Yeah.
but we are in very different times, and that's why it's important to recognize there's no single metric that's right. And especially in a world of very low interest rates, it's appropriate to look at the burden of that debt on society, which is better measured by the real interest burden of the debt. And that is exceptionally low, negative currently, but projected as interest rates normalize to rise to a level.
I'm going to run out of time.
It's still very
let me ask you this, Madam Chair, quickly. You gave a great speech back in September of 2019. It was actually an interview, and I ordered a copy at the time. And I'm trying to find my copy here. You said, this is what you said. I'm going to quote. I thought this was such a wise statement. You said, the former Fed chair said she is not worried about the debt to gross domestic product ratio in the United States right now, but added, and I quote, I'm worried about the trajectory of where it's going. It's not stable. We're not living within our means right now. Debt's going to escalate, and that's going to create problems down the road. But then most important is the demographic wave that lies ahead of us is going to essentially, over the next 30 years, double spending on 3 programs: Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid as a share of GDP. And the increases, both because of the aging population and on the healthcare side, medical expenses, those things put us on a trajectory of a completely sustainable budget path. Now, that was when the debt was $17 trillion. It's $29 trillion. You're going to add trillions more through the Build Back Better. Why is that not true today?
Well, I want to repeat again, Build Back Better is fully paid for and will not add to the debt or to deficits.
Right.
And in fact,
You and I just don't agree on
reduce
that.
it.
I understand.
CBO certainly agrees with what I said. And I mean, we do have problems eventually in financing Medicare and Social Security, which need to be addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.